The leather ID wallet fell from Marcus's jacket pocket as he hung it in our closet. When I picked it up and saw what was inside, everything I thought I knew about my husband of 3 years suddenly made sense. My mother's words echoed in my head. "Sarah, you're throwing your life away on nobody." She had no idea how wrong she was. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I met Marcus Rodriguez at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. I was running late for a client meeting, frantically trying to balance my laptop bag, umbrella, and a stack of architectural blueprints when I collided with someone near the door. Paper scattered everywhere and my coffee went flying. "Oh God, I'm so sorry!" The man immediately dropped to his knees, helping me gather the soggy blueprints. He had kind brown eyes and calloused hands that moved carefully as he tried to salvage my work. "These look important," he said, examining a water-stained drawing of a residential complex. "Are you an architect?" I nodded, still mortified. "Sarah Chen. And yes, these were for a presentation in about 10 minutes. Marcus Rodriguez." He stood up, extending his hand. "Look, there's a print shop 2 blocks down. They have high-speed scanners and can clean these up digitally in no time. I'll drive you there." Something about his calm confidence made me trust him immediately. We spent the next hour at the print shop, where Marcus somehow convinced the owner to prioritize my emergency. He knew exactly which settings would restore the faded lines, and even suggested improvements to the layout presentation. "You seem to know a lot about this stuff," I said as we waited for the final prints. Marcus shrugged. "I work with blueprints sometimes. Different kind, though." That was Marcus, always vague about his job, always deflecting with humor or changing the subject. All I knew was that he worked for the government, doing logistical coordination, and traveled frequently for work. He drove a modest Honda Civic, lived in a small apartment in Ballard, and wore the same 3 button-down shirts in rotation. We started dating gradually. Coffee dates turned into dinner dates, which turned into weekend hikes around Mount Rainier. Marcus was unlike anyone I'd ever been with. He was thoughtful, intelligent, and had this quiet strength that made me feel safe. He could fix anything. My leaky faucet, my laptop's mysterious crashes, even my mother's ancient sewing machine when we visited her in Portland. But my mother, Patricia Chen, saw none of these qualities. From the moment I brought Marcus home for Sunday dinner 6 months into our relationship, she decided he wasn't good enough. "What kind of future can you build with someone who doesn't even own a suit?" she whispered to me in the kitchen while Marcus helped my father set up his new TV. "Mom, not everyone needs to wear suits to be successful. Sarah, you have your master's degree from Stanford. You're building a career at one of the city's top architectural firms. You could have your pick of successful men, doctors, lawyers, other architects. Why are you settling?" The criticism never stopped. At family gatherings, she'd make pointed comments about Marcus's job being, quote, "in and clear," or how it was interesting that he never talked about advancement opportunities. She'd mention her friends' daughters who married surgeons or tech executives, always within earshot of Marcus. Marcus handled it with grace that amazed me. He never got defensive, never argued back. He'd just smile and change the subject, or find a way to help with something around the house. But I could see it wore on him. "Your mom thinks I'm not good enough for you," he said one evening after a particularly brutal dinner where she'd spent 20 minutes detailing her neighbor's son-in-law's promotion to partner at his law firm. "She doesn't know you like I do," I replied, taking his hand. "She'll come around." But she didn't. Even after Marcus proposed with a simple but beautiful ring he'd saved for months to buy, my mother remained skeptical. "It's a lovely ring, dear," she said when I showed it to her, "but have you really thought about this? Marriage is about building a life together. You need financial security, stability. What happens when you want to buy a house, have children? Will his government job support the lifestyle you're accustomed to?" The wedding planning became a battlefield. My mother insisted on paying for everything, which meant she controlled every decision. She chose the venue, the menu, even the color scheme. When Marcus's family flew in from New Mexico, his parents, 2 brothers, and his grandmother who raised him, my mother barely acknowledged them. They seem nice, she told me privately, but very simple people. His father works construction, his mother cleans houses. This is the family you're marrying into, Sarah. Marcus's family was wonderful. They were warm, genuine people who welcomed me immediately. His grandmother, Elena, pulled me aside during the rehearsal dinner. Mijo has always been special, she said in accented English, holding my hands. Even as a little boy, he was different. Smart, but also kind. He never forgot where he came from, no matter how far he traveled. Quote, I wondered what she meant by how far he traveled, but the conversation was interrupted by the photographer calling for family pictures. Our wedding day was beautiful despite my mother's constant management. Marcus looked handsome in his rented tuxedo, and when we said our vows, nothing else mattered. Not my mother's disapproving glances when his cousin played guitar instead of the string quartet she'd wanted. Not her obvious discomfort when Marcus's family sang a traditional Spanish blessing. After the honeymoon in Costa Rica, a trip Marcus had somehow afforded despite my mother's assumptions about his finances, we settled into married life. Marcus continued his mysterious government work, often leaving for week-long trips he couldn't discuss. I focused on my career, earning recognition for several major projects. But my mother's comments continued. At Christmas dinner, she'd ask pointed questions about our 5-year plan. At my birthday party, she'd wonder aloud when we'd start thinking seriously about the future. Every conversation felt like a test Marcus was failing. The breaking point came during Easter dinner at my parents' house. My mother had invited the Weatherbys, family friends whose son David was a cardiologist. Throughout dinner, she made sure to highlight David's recent purchase of a house in Bellevue, his new BMW, his upcoming promotion to department head. It's wonderful when young people really apply themselves, she said, looking directly at Marcus. David's parents must be so proud. There's nothing like the security of knowing your child has truly succeeded. Marcus excused himself to help clear dishes, and I followed him to the kitchen. His jaw was tight, his movements sharp as he scraped plates. I can talk to her, I said quietly. No, Sarah. She's your mother. She wants what's best for you. He paused, holding a wine glass up to the light to check for spots. Maybe she's right. Maybe you did marry down. Don't you dare say that. I grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at me. You're the best man I know. You're kind, intelligent, hardworking. But I'm not a doctor. I don't drive a BMW. I can't give you the life she thinks you deserve. That night, driving home in silence, I made a decision. I was going to find out exactly what Marcus did for work and prove to my mother that she was wrong about him. He was always so secretive, so modest about his job. There had to be more to it than he let on. I started paying closer attention to the details. His work clothes were always perfectly pressed, despite him claiming to work in logistics. He received calls at odd hours, speaking in low tones using terms I didn't recognize. Sometimes he'd come home with a tan after a week in what he claimed were conference rooms in D.C. The clues were there, but I'd been too trusting, too respectful of his privacy to piece them together. That was about to change. My investigation started small. While Marcus showered after returning from another mysterious week-long trip, I rifled through his carry-on bag. Nothing unusual. Toiletries, a few changes of clothes, and a manila folder filled with documents covered in so many black redaction bars they looked like abstract art. The letterhead read, Strategic Operations Division, but gave no other identifying information. I snapped a quick photo with my phone before carefully placing everything back exactly as I'd found it. Over the next few weeks, I became a detective in my own home. I started a secret note in my phone, documenting every strange detail. Marcus never seemed to have jet lag, despite claiming to travel across time zones. His suitcase always smelled faintly of desert dust, not the stale air of conference rooms. Most telling of all, he had a farmer's tan that made no sense for someone who supposedly spent his days in government buildings. The breakthrough came when I decided to follow him to work. I'd never actually seen his office, which should have been a red flag from the beginning. He always claimed it was in a, quote, boring federal building downtown, and that visitors weren't allowed without extensive security clearance. On a Thursday morning in June, I called in sick to work and waited in my car near our apartment. When Marcus left in his Honda Civic, I followed at a distance, my heart pounding like I was in some spy thriller. Instead of heading downtown, He drove south towards SeaTac Airport, but he didn't go to the passenger terminals. He turned into a restricted access road, marked authorized personnel only. My stomach dropped as I watched his car disappear through a security checkpoint guarded by military police. I sat in a nearby parking lot for 2 hours, processing what I'd seen. Marcus wasn't just a government worker. He was something that required military-level security clearance. But what? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. That evening, I tried to act normal when he returned home with Chinese takeout and stories about his budget meeting. "How was your conference room today?" I asked, accepting the container of lo mein. "Same as always. Fluorescent lights, terrible coffee, endless spreadsheets about supply chains." He kissed my forehead. "How are you feeling? You looked a little pale this morning." The lies came so easily to him, yet he delivered them with the same gentle smile he gave me every day. It was unsettling and impressive at the same time. My next move was more direct. I created a fake LinkedIn profile and started searching for people who worked in Strategic Operations Division. The results were limited and vague, but I found 3 profiles that mentioned working in, quote, classified logistics coordination for the Department of Defense. One profile belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Hayes, whose photo showed her in dress military uniform with more ribbons and medals than I could count. According to her very sparse public information, she specialized in overseas operational support and had been deployed to 17 different countries over her 20-year career. If Marcus worked with people like Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, he wasn't pushing papers in some mundane government office. He was involved in something significant, something classified, something that required the kind of security I'd witnessed at the airport. I decided to test my theory. That weekend, while Marcus was in the garage working on his car, I brought up the topic of his coworkers. "You never talk about the people you work with," I said, handing him a beer. "Are they friendly? Do you have work friends?" Marcus paused, wrench in hand. "It's not really that kind of job, Sarah. We keep things pretty professional." "What about Jennifer Hayes? She seems interesting." The wrench slipped from his hand and clattered onto the concrete floor. When he looked up at me, his expression had changed completely. The easygoing Marcus was gone, replaced by someone alert and calculating. "Where did you hear that name?" I stumbled, realizing I'd made a mistake. "I thought you mentioned her once." Marcus stood up slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I have never mentioned anyone named Jennifer Hayes. If someone approached you asking about my work, or if you've been contacted by anyone claiming to know me professionally, I need to know immediately." Quote, the intensity in his voice scared me. This wasn't my gentle husband who fixed broken appliances and made terrible dad jokes. This was someone else entirely. "I found her on LinkedIn," I admitted. "I was curious about your job, so I looked up your department." Marcus closed his eyes and let out a long breath. When he opened them, he looked tired, in a way I'd never seen before. "We need to talk," he said. We sat at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd planned our wedding, discussed our dreams, and shared thousands of meals. But now it felt like an interrogation room. "How much do you know?" Marcus asked. "Almost nothing. That's the problem. You leave for weeks at a time, you come back with a tan, you drive to the airport instead of downtown, and you work with people who have military titles and security clearances. I'm your wife, Marcus. Don't I deserve to know who I married?" Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. "I wanted to tell you. So many times, I wanted to tell you everything. But there are rules, Sarah, legal obligations. People's lives depend on maintaining operational security." "What kind of lives?" "The kind that wouldn't exist anymore if the wrong people knew what I did for a living." A chill ran down my spine. "Are you in danger? Are we in danger?" "No," he said quickly. "My job is dangerous, but not in the way you're thinking. I'm not a spy or a special forces operator. I don't carry weapons or infiltrate terrorist organizations. I'm exactly what I told you. Logistical coordination. But the logistics I coordinate." He trailed off, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "The logistics you coordinate, what?" Keep our military personnel alive in places where staying alive isn't guaranteed. The pieces started fitting together. The mysterious trips, the security clearance, the tan, the secrecy. Marcus wasn't sitting in conference rooms in Washington, D.C. He was coordinating supply chains and operations for military missions in active conflict zones. You go overseas, I said. It wasn't a question. I can't confirm specific locations, but yes, my work requires international travel to challenging environments. How challenging? Marcus met my eyes. The kind where saying goodbye to your wife every morning might actually be goodbye. My hands started shaking. All this time, while I'd been worried about my mother's disapproval and our 5-year financial plan, Marcus had been risking his life in war zones, making sure soldiers had the supplies and support they needed to come home to their families. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you'd worry. Because I knew it would change how you saw me, how you lived your life. Because I wanted to be just Marcus to you, not Marcus who might not come home from work. But all those times you came back safe, all those times you walked through our door with stories about boring meetings and conference rooms. All those times I was grateful beyond words that I got to lie to you about budget meetings instead of having someone in uniform knock on our door. I reached across the table and took his hands. They were shaking too. Is this why you were so patient with my mother? Because her opinion of your job didn't matter compared to staying alive long enough to prove her wrong, yeah. We sat in silence, holding hands across our kitchen table. Everything I thought I knew about our marriage had just shifted, but somehow I felt closer to Marcus than ever before. He'd been protecting me from worry while putting himself in harm's way to serve his country. But I also realized something else. If my mother knew the truth about Marcus's work, if she understood the level of responsibility and courage his job required, she'd have to completely reevaluate her opinion of the man I married. The question was, would Marcus ever be able to tell her? The conversation at our kitchen table opened a door that couldn't be closed. Over the following days, Marcus began sharing fragments of his real world. Carefully, cautiously, but honestly for the first time in our relationship. I can't tell you about specific missions or locations, he explained one evening as we walked along the waterfront, but I can tell you why I do this work. He told me about his first deployment to Afghanistan in 2018, fresh out of his master's program in supply chain management from Georgetown. He'd been assigned to coordinate medical supply deliveries to forward operating bases, a job that sounded mundane until you realized that getting blood plasma and surgical equipment to remote outposts meant the difference between soldiers bleeding out in the desert or making it home to their families. The first convoy I coordinated saved 6 lives in one night, Marcus said, watching the ferries cross Elliott Bay. A roadside bomb hit a patrol, and because we'd pre-positioned trauma supplies at their closest base, the medics had what they needed within 15 minutes instead of 3 hours. I began to understand why he'd been so vague about his accomplishments. How do you casually mention at a dinner party that your logistical decisions directly impact whether someone's son or daughter survives combat? But Marcus wasn't finished with his revelations. As we sat on a bench overlooking the Sound, he pulled out his phone and showed me a photo I'd never seen before. It showed him in desert camouflage, standing next to a helicopter with 4 other people in military gear. This was taken last month, he said quietly. I was in Syria, coordinating the evacuation of a medical facility that came under attack. We had 47 patients who needed to be moved to safety, including premature twins in incubators. I stared at the photo. The man in camouflage looked like Marcus, but harder somehow. His face was leaner, his posture more alert. This was the version of my husband I'd never met. Did everyone make it out? Everyone made it out. He tucked the phone away. But Sarah, I need you to understand. This isn't just my job, this is who I am. I can't turn off the part of me that feels responsible for keeping people safe. That weekend, my perspective shifted again when Marcus received an emergency call on Saturday morning. I watched him transform from my relaxed husband making pancakes into someone else entirely. His voice became crisp and authoritative as he issued rapid-fire instructions about medical supply routes and helicopter maintenance schedules. I have to go, he said after hanging up. There's been an incident. I might be gone for 2 weeks. Is it dangerous? Marcus paused while packing his bag. It's always dangerous, Sarah. But this is what I trained for. He kissed me goodbye, and I realized I was watching him leave the same way military wives had been doing for generations, with pride, fear, and the knowledge that their husbands were doing something essential. While Marcus was gone, I did something I'd never done before. I researched his work properly, not through casual LinkedIn searches, but through military family support websites and Defense Department publications I found online. I learned that logistics coordinators like Marcus were responsible for something called expeditionary sustainment, essentially keeping military operations running in the most challenging environments on Earth. They coordinated everything from ammunition resupply to medical evacuations, often while embedded with combat units in active war zones. The more I read, the more I realized how much Marcus had downplayed his role. These weren't desk jobs. Logistics coordinators were often targeted by enemy forces, specifically because disrupting supply lines could cripple entire operations. They worked in mobile command centers, often within mortar range of enemy positions. I found an article about a logistics coordinator who'd been killed by a sniper while overseeing a supply convoy in Iraq. Another about a team that had worked for 36 hours straight to coordinate medical supplies during a siege. These people weren't bureaucrats. They were combat veterans who happened to specialize in keeping other people alive. When Marcus returned from his 2-week deployment, he looked exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. But over dinner, he told me about the successful evacuation of a school that had been caught in crossfire and how his coordination had helped get 200 children to safety. "I'm proud of you," I told him that night as we lay in bed. "I'm proud of what you do, and I'm sorry I didn't understand before." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. The secrecy, it becomes a habit. Sometimes I forget that the most important person in my life deserves to know who she married." "Speaking of which," I said carefully, "I think my mother deserves to know too." Marcus tensed beside me. "Sarah, I can't discuss classified details with your mother. Not the classified parts. But she needs to know that you're not some low-level government employee pushing papers. She needs to understand that you're serving your country, that you're risking your life to keep people safe." "Will it matter?" "She's already decided I'm not good enough for you." "It'll matter because it's the truth, and because maybe it's time she learned what real success looks like." The opportunity came sooner than expected. My mother called the next day to invite us to a barbecue at their house the following weekend. She'd invited the Weatherbys again, along with several other family friends who fit her definition of, quote, successful young couples, quote. "She's setting up another comparison session," I told Marcus after hanging up. "David, the cardiologist, will be there with his new fiancée, and I guarantee my mother will spend the afternoon highlighting everyone's achievements except yours." Marcus sighed. "Maybe we should skip it." "No, I think it's time we stopped letting her assumptions go unchallenged." That week, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called the number on Marcus's emergency contact list, not to create a crisis, but to speak with his supervisor, Colonel Michael Thompson. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Colonel Thompson said when I explained who I was. "I hope there isn't an emergency." "No emergency, sir. I'm calling because I need to understand something about my husband's work. Not classified details, just the general nature of what he does." There was a pause. "Has Marcus not discussed his role with you?" "He's told me some things recently, but I think he's been modest about the scope of his responsibilities. My family has some misconceptions about his career, and I'd like to correct them if possible." Colonel Thompson was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I can't discuss operational details, but I can tell you that your husband is one of the most skilled logistics coordinators in our division. His work has directly contributed to the success of multiple high-priority missions, and his expertise has saved lives in situations where failure wasn't an option. Can you tell me anything about his qualifications, his training?" Marcus holds a master's degree in supply chain management from Georgetown University, has completed advanced courses in crisis management and international logistics, and is certified in emergency medical response. He speaks 3 languages fluently and has been deployed to 12 different countries over the past 6 years. In military terms, he's what we call a force multiplier. someone whose individual contributions significantly enhance the effectiveness of entire operations. I felt my chest swell with pride. Thank you, Colonel. That's exactly what I needed to know. Mrs. Rodriguez, I hope you understand how fortunate we are to have your husband's service. What he does requires not just technical skill, but enormous personal courage. Not everyone is willing to coordinate supply lines while mortar rounds are falling nearby. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about everything I'd learned. Marcus wasn't just successful, he was exceptional. He was highly educated, extensively trained, and trusted with life-or-death responsibilities by the United States military. My mother had been judging him based on his modest car and simple clothes, never realizing she was looking at someone who held people's lives in his hands on a regular basis. It was time she learned the truth. Saturday arrived with typical Seattle drizzle, matching my nervous energy as Marcus and I drove to my parents' house in Bellevue. I'd spent the week planning what I would say, how I would finally defend my husband against my mother's years of subtle criticism. You seem tense, Marcus observed as we pulled into the familiar driveway lined with luxury cars. David Weatherby's new BMW, the Hendersons' Tesla, and my father's pristine Mercedes. I'm tired of pretending your job isn't important, I said, checking my reflection in the side mirror. Today, she's going to learn exactly who she's been dismissing all these years. Marcus reached over and squeezed my hand. Sarah, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I don't need your mother's approval to feel good about my work. Maybe not, but I need her to stop treating you like you're beneath our family. The barbecue was already in full swing when we walked through the back gate. My mother had outdone herself with the setup. White linens on the patio tables, professional catering, and enough flower arrangements to stock a wedding. She greeted us with her practiced smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes when Marcus was involved. Sarah, darling. And Marcus, so nice of you to join us despite your busy schedule of meetings. She air-kissed my cheek while barely acknowledging my husband's presence. Within minutes, the comparisons began. David Weatherby was holding court near the grill, discussing his recent promotion to chief of cardiology, while his fiancée, Amanda, showed off her engagement ring to a cluster of admiring women. David just bought a house in Medina, Mrs. Weatherby announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. 4 bedrooms, waterfront views. He says it's an investment in their future. My mother nodded approvingly. How wonderful to see young people really establishing themselves. There's something to be said for traditional markers of success. I felt Marcus tense beside me, but he maintained his usual diplomatic smile. This was exactly the kind of conversation I'd witnessed dozens of times. Subtle digs disguised as praise for others. The afternoon continued with more of the same. Stories about promotions, vacation homes, and career achievements, all delivered with pointed glances in our direction. My mother made sure to mention that the Johnson's son had just made partner at his law firm, that the Chang's daughter had been featured in Seattle Magazine for her tech startup success. It must be nice, she said during a lull in conversation, to have such clear measures of achievement. Some careers are just more visible, aren't they? That was my breaking point. Actually, Mom, I think it's time everyone understood exactly what Marcus does for a living. The patio fell quiet. David paused mid-sentence about his surgical techniques, and even my father looked up from his conversation about golf handicaps. Sarah, Marcus said quietly, you don't need to. Yes, I do. I stood up, facing the group of people who'd spent years treating my husband like he was somehow lesser than their accomplished children. You all assume Marcus has some boring government desk job because he doesn't talk about his work. The truth is, he can't talk about his work because it's classified. My mother's eyebrows rose. Classified? Marcus coordinates logistics for military operations overseas, not from an office in Seattle. He's deployed to active combat zones where he's responsible for keeping soldiers alive. The silence stretched uncomfortably. David's fiancée shifted in her seat, suddenly looking less sure of herself. He has a master's degree from Georgetown University, I continued, gaining momentum. He speaks 3 languages fluently. He's trained in emergency medical response, and he's been deployed to 12 different countries over the past 6 years. While David was doing his residency in comfortable hospitals, Marcus was coordinating medical supply deliveries while mortar rounds fell around him. My mother's face had gone pale. "Sarah, I think you're being a bit dramatic." "Am I?" Last month, Marcus coordinated the evacuation of a medical facility in Syria that came under attack. 47 patients, including premature twins and incubators. Everyone made it out alive because of his planning and coordination. Marcus was staring at me with a mixture of pride and concern. I knew I was pushing the boundaries of what he was comfortable sharing, but I couldn't stop. The reason he drives a Honda Civic instead of a BMW isn't because he can't afford better. It's because he spends half his time in places where the only thing that matters is whether you have enough fuel to get wounded soldiers to safety. The reason he doesn't wear expensive suits is because his work uniform is combat gear. Mrs. Weatherby cleared her throat uncomfortably. "We had no idea, Marcus." "That sounds very intense." My father, who'd remained silent through my outburst, set down his beer and looked directly at Marcus. "Son, is what Sarah's saying accurate?" Marcus met his gaze steadily. "I can't discuss operational details, but yes, sir. I coordinate logistics for military operations in challenging environments." "What kind of logistics?" my father pressed. "Everything from ammunition resupply to medical evacuations. Food, water, fuel, equipment maintenance, personnel transport. If soldiers need it to complete their mission and stay alive, it's my job to make sure they have it." The weight of his words settled over the patio. These were people who understood responsibility. They were doctors, lawyers, business executives. But none of them had ever held other people's lives in their hands quite so literally. David Weatherby, to his credit, was the first to respond. "That's incredible, Marcus. I had no idea the military relied on civilian contractors for that level of operational support." "We're not exactly contractors," Marcus said carefully. "We're Department of Defense employees with specialized training. Think of it as battlefield management consulting, but with considerably higher stakes." My mother had been unusually quiet during this exchange. Finally, she spoke up, her voice smaller than usual. "Marcus, I owe you an apology. I've been unfair in my assessment of your career. I didn't understand." "Mrs. Chen, you didn't have the information to understand. I keep my work private for operational security reasons, not because I'm ashamed of it." "But Sarah," my mother turned to me, "why didn't you tell me sooner? All this time, I thought." "You thought he wasn't good enough for me. You made that very clear." The accusation hung in the air. My mother looked genuinely stricken, as if she was seeing Marcus clearly for the first time. "I was wrong," she said simply. "I was measuring success by all the wrong standards." Marcus stood up and walked over to my mother's chair. "Mrs. Chen, I understand why you were concerned. You want the best for Sarah, and from the outside, my job probably looked uncertain and unstable. But I want you to know that I love your daughter more than anything in this world, and everything I do is motivated by wanting to build a life worthy of her." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "I see that now, and I'm ashamed that it took me this long to recognize it." The conversation gradually resumed, but the dynamic had completely shifted. Instead of subtle competitions about material success, people began asking Marcus genuine questions about his work, his travels, his perspective on international affairs. David, who'd seemed so impressive an hour earlier, now looked almost sheltered by comparison. As the evening wound down, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen while Marcus helped my father clean the grill. "I was wrong about him, Sarah. Completely wrong." "I know. He's not just successful, he's extraordinary. And the fact that he's been so humble about it, so patient with my ignorance, I don't deserve his forgiveness." I looked through the window at Marcus, who was laughing at something my father had said. "That's who he is, Mom. That's who he's always been. You just couldn't see it because you were looking for the wrong things. How do I make this right?" "You start by treating him like the remarkable man he is. And maybe you stop judging people based on what kind of car they drive or where they buy their clothes." My mother nodded, wiping her eyes with a dish towel. "Your father is going to want to hear more about Marcus's work. He's fascinated by the strategic aspects." "Marcus will be happy to share what he can. He's proud of what he does. He just doesn't talk about it because bragging about keeping people alive feels wrong to him. As we drove home that night, Marcus was quiet until we reached our neighborhood. "Thank you," he said finally, "for defending me, for making them understand. I know that wasn't easy. It was overdue. I should have done it years ago." Your mother seemed genuinely sorry. She was, and she should be. But Marcus, I need you to know something. I didn't defend you today because I wanted her approval. I defended you because I'm proud to be married to you, and I was tired of other people not seeing what I see. Marcus pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. "What do you see?" "I see a man who risks his life to serve his country, who stays humble despite doing extraordinary things, and who somehow found time to fall in love with me in between saving other people's lives." Quote. But even as I said the words, I realized there were still things about Marcus I didn't know. The Pentagon ID in his wallet that I'd glimpsed that morning suggested there were layers to his story that even today's revelations hadn't fully uncovered. The weeks following the barbecue brought a welcome change to our family dynamics. My mother called Marcus directly to invite him to lunch, asked detailed questions about his work during our visits, and even bragged to her friends about her son-in-law who serves overseas. The transformation was remarkable, but it also made me realize how much I still didn't know about my husband's true role. Marcus seemed more relaxed now that the secret was partially out. He began sharing stories about his colleagues, mentioned specific training exercises he'd completed, and even showed me photos from some of his deployments that weren't classified. But there were still gaps, still moments when he'd catch himself before revealing too much. The revelation came on a Tuesday morning in late July. Marcus had returned from what he called a routine briefing in D.C. the night before, exhausted from the red-eye flight. As he hung his suit jacket in our bedroom closet, his wallet fell from the inside pocket, spilling its contents across our hardwood floor. I bent to help gather the scattered cards and papers when I saw it, a black leather ID holder that had fallen open to reveal a laminated badge I'd never seen before. The seal at the top made my breath catch, the distinctive five-sided emblem of the Pentagon, with Department of Defense printed in bold letters beneath it. But it wasn't just any Pentagon ID. Below Marcus's photo and basic information, I saw words that made everything click into place. Strategic Operations Division. Level 4 Clearance. Counterterrorism Logistics. Counterterrorism, not general military logistics, not routine supply coordination. My husband was involved in operations against terrorist organizations. "Sarah?" Marcus's voice came from the bathroom where he was brushing his teeth. "Did something fall?" I quickly gathered the remaining items, but kept the ID holder in my hand. When Marcus emerged, toothbrush still in his mouth, he froze. "We need to talk," I said, holding up the badge. Marcus spit into the sink and rinsed his mouth, buying time. When he turned to face me, his expression was resigned. "How much did you see?" Quote, "Enough to know that coordinating medical supplies is just the tip of the iceberg." Marcus sat heavily on our bed. "Sarah, there are things I still can't tell you. Things that..." "Counterterrorism logistics," I interrupted. "That's what this says. You're not just supporting regular military operations, are you?" A long pause. "No." The single word hung between us. I sat down beside him, still holding the ID. "What does that mean exactly, in terms I can understand?" Marcus stared at his hands. "You know how I told you I coordinate supplies and evacuation routes for military personnel?" "Yes." "That's true. But the military personnel I support aren't regular Army units. They're special operations teams conducting missions against high-value terrorist targets." My stomach dropped. "Special operations, like Navy SEALs?" SEALs, Army Rangers, Delta Force, CIA paramilitary teams. When they need to get in and out of hostile territory without being detected. I'm one of the people who make sure they have everything they need to succeed and survive. The room felt like it was spinning. "Marcus, are you telling me that when you go on these deployments you're supporting raids on terrorist compounds?" "I can't discuss specific operations, but yes, that's the general nature of my work." I thought about all the times he'd left for budget meetings and logistics conferences. How many of those trips had actually been planning sessions for operations that would be featured in classified briefings at the highest levels of government? The Syrian medical facility evacuation you told my parents about was a cover story, a true one, but not the complete picture. We were evacuating a facility that had been providing medical support to a joint task force conducting counterterrorism operations in the region. So when you said mortar rounds were falling, they weren't random mortar rounds, Sarah. We were under targeted attack by a terrorist cell that had identified our location. I felt lightheaded. How long have you been doing this level of operations? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Remember when I told you about my first deployment in 2018? The one where I helped coordinate medical supplies that saved 6 lives? Yes. Those weren't regular soldiers, Sarah. They were a special operations team that had been conducting surveillance on an ISIS training camp. The roadside bomb wasn't random. They'd been made, and the attack was specifically designed to eliminate them before they could report back on what they'd discovered. Everything I thought I knew shifted again. Marcus hadn't just been supporting regular military operations. He'd been an integral part of the most sensitive and dangerous missions the United States conducted overseas. The phone calls you get at odd hours. Crisis coordination for time-sensitive operations. When a special ops team needs emergency extraction or their mission parameters change, they need someone who can reorganize supply chains and evacuation routes within minutes, not hours. And the security clearance level on this badge means I have access to operational details that could compromise ongoing missions and get people killed if they fell into the wrong hands. I studied his face, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in our entire relationship. Marcus, you're not just a logistics coordinator. You're a strategic planner for some of the most dangerous missions our military conducts. That's accurate. Why didn't you tell me this at the barbecue? When I was defending your work to my mother? Marcus managed a weak smile. Because saying my husband plans supply routes for Navy SEAL raids at a suburban barbecue seemed like it might raise some uncomfortable questions. Despite everything, I laughed. Fair point. Sarah, I need you to understand something. This badge, what you've learned today, it can never be discussed with anyone. Not your parents, not your best friend, not anyone. The operational security requirements aren't just military protocol. People's lives depend on this information staying private. I understand. I looked at the badge again. But I also need to understand something else. How dangerous is this work, really? Not the diplomatic version you gave me before, the truth. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Last year, a logistics coordinator working similar operations was killed in Afghanistan when his convoy was ambushed. 2 years ago, a planning facility I'd worked out of was targeted by a suicide bomber 3 days after I left. This isn't theoretical danger, Sarah. People want to kill me specifically because of what I do. The words hit me like a physical blow. Marcus. But it's also the most important work I've ever done. The operations I support have prevented terrorist attacks that would have killed hundreds of people. They've eliminated high-value targets who were planning operations against American citizens. Every time I come home safely, it's not just a victory for our family. It's a victory for every person who didn't become a casualty of the attacks we prevented. I set the badge on our nightstand and took his hands. I'm proud of you. Terrified, but proud. Are you sure? Because if this is too much, knowing the truth makes our marriage harder. Marcus, stop. Do you remember what I said to my mother at the barbecue? That you're extraordinary? I had no idea how extraordinary. It's also why I was so patient with your mother's criticism. When you're responsible for operations that literally prevent terrorist attacks on American soil, someone's opinion about your car or your clothes seems manageable. She's going to feel even worse when she realizes how much she underestimated you. She doesn't need to know the details, Sarah. What I told everyone at the barbecue was true, just not complete. The counterterrorism aspects need to stay between us. I nodded, understanding the weight of what he was trusting me with. One more question. Okay. When you proposed to me, when we got married, when we've talked about having children someday, have you thought about how this job affects those plans? Marcus's expression grew serious. Every day, Sarah, I know this isn't the normal life you signed up for. If you want me to request a transfer to domestic operations, if you need me to step back from overseas deployments, I don't want you to change anything, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I want you to keep doing the work that makes you who you are. But I also want us to be honest with each other about what that means for our future. It means our children will have a father who serves his country at the highest levels, but also a father who faces real risks in that service. It means you'll worry more than most military wives, because the nature of my work is more dangerous than most military jobs. But it also means they'll grow up knowing their father helped keep them and millions of other people safe. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw not just the man I'd fallen in love with, but someone whose courage and dedication operated on a scale I was only beginning to comprehend. Then that's the life we'll build together, I said. All of it, the good parts and the scary parts. Marcus pulled me into his arms. I love you, Sarah, and I promise, no more secrets. At least, no more secrets. I have a choice about keeping. As we held each other, I realized that learning the complete truth about Marcus had changed everything and nothing at the same time. He was still the same gentle, thoughtful man who fixed my broken appliances and made terrible jokes. But now I understood that the same qualities that made him a wonderful husband, his attention to detail, his calm under pressure, his deep sense of responsibility, also made him uniquely suited for work that most people couldn't even imagine doing. My mother had been wrong about Marcus, but in ways that were even more profound than I'd realized at the barbecue. She hadn't just married down. She'd married someone whose work was so far above what she considered success that there wasn't even a comparison to be made. 3 months after the Pentagon ID revelation, our lives had settled into a new rhythm built on complete honesty. Marcus no longer deflected questions about his work, though he remained careful about operational details. I'd learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when he was being called away for something more dangerous than usual, the way he'd double-check our home security system, or how he'd spend extra time maintaining his emergency communication equipment. The most unexpected change came from my mother. Once she'd processed the full scope of Marcus's work, or at least the parts one could safely share, she became his most fierce advocate. At her bridge club, she'd casually mention her son-in-law who works in national security. At family gatherings, she'd steer conversations away from material accomplishments toward discussions of service and sacrifice. But it was during Thanksgiving dinner that I truly understood how completely her perspective had transformed. We were hosting for the first time. My parents, Marcus's parents, who'd flown in from New Mexico, and his grandmother, Elena, now 89 but still sharp as ever. The conversation had naturally turned to current events, specifically a recent news story about a thwarted terrorist plot in Europe. It's terrifying to think about what could have happened, my mother said, serving sweet potatoes. Hundreds of innocent people could have been killed. Marcus's father, Roberto, nodded gravely. Makes you grateful for the people working behind the scenes to keep us safe. I caught Marcus's eye across the table. He gave me the slightest smile. We both knew he'd likely been involved in the intelligence gathering that led to that plot being uncovered, but it would never be something he could claim credit for publicly. You know, my mother continued, setting down the serving spoon, I used to think success meant having the biggest house or the most impressive job title. But I've learned recently that real success is measured by the impact you have on other people's lives. She looked directly at Marcus. There are people in this world who go to work every day knowing their decisions might mean the difference between families staying together or being torn apart by violence. That's a level of responsibility I never properly appreciated before. Marcus's grandmother, Elena, had been quietly listening to this exchange. Suddenly, she spoke up in her accented English. Mijo, you remember when you were little, and you would ask me why your papa worked so many hours in construction? Marcus nodded. You told me he was building homes for families who needed them. Sigh, that's right, but you know what else I told you? That honest work in service of others is the highest calling, no matter what form it takes. Elena smiled, her weathered hands folding over her napkin. Your father built homes, you build safety. Both are gifts to families you will never meet. The simplicity of her words hit me harder than any of the complex explanations about strategic operations or classified clearances. At its core, Marcus's work was about the same thing his father's had been, creating something essential that allowed other people to live their lives in peace. After dinner, as we cleaned dishes and my father grilled Marcus about geopolitical strategy, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Sarah, I owe you an apology too. Mom, we've been through this. Not just about Marcus, about you." She handed me a plate to dry. "I was so focused on what I thought your life should look like that I never stopped to consider what kind of life would actually make you happy." I paused in my drying. "What do you mean?" "You chose a man who challenges you intellectually, who shares your values, who makes you feel safe and cherished. You chose someone whose work has genuine meaning, even if that work comes with sacrifices. You chose a partner, not a status symbol." She was quiet for a moment, watching through the window as Marcus helped my father set up his new outdoor heater. "I was wrong to try to push you toward David Weatherby and men like him. They're fine people, but they would have given you a very different kind of life. Comfortable, predictable, socially impressive. But would you have been truly happy?" I considered this. Probably not. I need someone who understands that life is bigger than dinner party conversations and vacation house renovations. Marcus doesn't just understand that, he lives it. And watching the two of you together, seeing how he looks at you, how he talks about your dreams and supports your career, I realize I was measuring him by all the wrong standards. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Marcus and I sat on our couch with cups of tea, processing the day. "Your grandmother is remarkable," I said, "the way she puts things in perspective. She raised me after my parents' divorce, when I was 12. She's the one who taught me that what matters isn't what work you do, but why you do it." Is that why you chose this career? Not just the logistics training, but the counterterrorism focus? Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring into his tea. "Do you remember 9/11? "Of course. I was in high school. I was 17, a senior in high school in Albuquerque. I watched those towers fall on live television in my American government class. My teacher, Mr. Harrison, turned off the TV and said something I've never forgotten." "What was that?" He said, "Class, you're watching history. Someday you'll have to decide what role you want to play in preventing this from happening again." Marcus set down his mug. "I thought about that every day, through college, through graduate school. I could have taken a job with FedEx or Amazon, made more money coordinating civilian supply chains. But I kept thinking about Mr. Harrison's words. What role did I want to play? So you chose the hardest role possible. I chose the role that felt necessary. Every time I coordinate supplies for a counterterrorism operation, every time I help plan an extraction that brings our people home safely, I think about those families who lost everything on 9/11. If my work prevents even one family from experiencing that loss, it's worth every risk." I curled up against his side, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Does it ever scare you? Not the physical danger, but the responsibility?" "Every day. Sarah, when I'm planning logistics for an operation, I know that if I make a mistake, if I calculate fuel requirements wrong or miscalculate extraction timing, or fail to account for weather conditions, people die. Not just our people, but potentially thousands of innocent civilians if a terrorist plot succeeds because we couldn't stop it. How do you handle that pressure?" "I think about you, about the life we're building together, about the children we might have someday. I think about all the families like ours who get to wake up safely because of the work we do. And I remember that I'm not doing this alone. I'm part of a team of people who are all committed to the same mission." As we sat there in comfortable silence, I reflected on how dramatically my understanding of success had evolved. 6 months ago, I'd been embarrassed by my husband's modest lifestyle and defensive about his unremarkable-seeming career. Now I understood that I was married to someone whose work operated at the highest levels of national security, whose decisions had global implications, whose daily courage was something most people couldn't even comprehend. But more than that, I'd learned that the qualities I'd always loved about Marcus, his humility, his thoughtfulness, his quiet strength, weren't separate from his professional abilities. They were exactly what made him suited for work that required both extraordinary skill and unshakable moral grounding. "Marcus, I said softly. I have a confession. Oh? I used to worry that I'd get married down. Maybe my mother was right, and I could have found someone more ambitious, more successful, more impressive. Marcus chuckled. And now? Now I realize I married someone so far above what I ever thought possible that I'm still processing it. You're not just successful, Marcus. You're exceptional in ways that most people will never even know about. Does that change things for us? Make our relationship feel different? I considered this carefully. It makes me prouder to be your wife. It makes me more aware of how precious our time together is. But it doesn't change the fundamental things. That you make me laugh. That you're kind to my parents even when they don't deserve it. That you fix my broken laptop and remember to buy the good coffee. Those things matter too. They matter because they're who you are when you're not saving the world. They're proof that all your training and expertise hasn't changed the essential Marcus. The one who stops to help strangers pick up scattered blueprints on rainy Tuesday mornings. As we prepared for bed that night, Marcus pulled out his phone to check his secure email. A routine I'd grown accustomed to. Usually, he'd scan quickly and put it away. Tonight, he paused. Everything okay? I asked. I just got confirmation on something I've been hoping for. He looked up with a smile that was equal parts relief and excitement. I've been selected for a new position. Still counter-terrorism logistics, but based domestically. I'd be coordinating support for operations from Quantico instead of deploying overseas. My heart jumped. What does that mean? It means regular hours, no more month-long deployments, and sleeping in our own bed every night. It also means I can tell you more about what I'm working on, since domestic operations have different security requirements. Marcus, that's incredible. But is it what you want? You're not taking it just because of what I said about worrying? He sat on the bed beside me. I'm taking it because I'm ready for the next phase of my career, and because I want to be present for the next phase of our life together. Sarah, I've spent 6 years proving I could handle the most dangerous assignments the military offers. Now I want to spend the next phase proving I can be the husband and father you deserve. Father? I raised an eyebrow. Marcus grinned sheepishly. I know we haven't officially decided yet, but watching my parents with Elena today, seeing how proud they are of the family they built, I realized I want that with you. I want to build something lasting. I kissed him softly. I want that too. And Marcus? Our kids are going to be so proud when they're old enough to understand what their father really does for a living. They're going to think it's cool that their mom designed buildings that will still be standing when they're grandparents. As we turned off the lights, I thought about the letter I'd write to my younger self. The anxious woman who'd been embarrassed by her husband's Honda Civic and worried about her mother's approval. I'd tell her that success isn't measured by the car in your driveway or the title on your business card. It's measured by the courage to choose meaningful work over easy work, by the strength to stay humble despite extraordinary accomplishments, and by the wisdom to build a life with someone whose values align with your deepest beliefs about what matters in this world. I'd married a hero. It had just taken me 3 years to recognize him. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Marcus on the phone in the kitchen, speaking in the crisp, authoritative tone I'd come to associate with his work voice. But for the first time, instead of feeling shut out by the conversation I couldn't understand, I felt proud to be connected to something so important. When he hung up and brought me coffee in bed, I smiled at this man who would spend his day ensuring other families could wake up safely, then come home to help me plan our garden renovation. Good morning, husband, I said, accepting the mug. Good morning, wife. Ready to start building our extraordinary ordinary life? I kissed him, tasting coffee and possibilities. I can't think of anything I'd rather do. Outside, Seattle was waking up under its usual gray sky, a city full of people going about their daily lives, most of them blissfully unaware of the complex machinery of protection that operated quietly in the background to keep them safe. In our small apartment, over morning coffee and shared plans for the future, we were a tiny part of that machinery. Not just Marcus, but both of us, building the kind of life that made all the risk and sacrifice worthwhile. My mother had been wrong about Marcus. But more importantly, I'd been wrong about what kind of life I wanted to build. I thought I wanted to impress. What I'd actually needed was meaningful. And in Marcus, I'd found both. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, These are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.